Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel as always, and welcome back to another lecture in my Esoteric Keys or Secrets of Disclosure series. So if you haven't caught my earlier lectures, do go back and check them out. I'll link them in the comments section because this is a lecture and a series of lectures that you really have to watch in order to understand. So in our last discussion, we were talking about the ancient concept of the spiritual hierarchies and how the spiritual hierarchies are, in fact, interwoven in everything in our life and are the defining and key aspect of human development and human evolution over time. Okay, so in order to really grasp that, we have to go back into the past and understand further how we have interacted with the hierarchies, what they were called. And we have to go back into prior traditions and we have to go back into key moments of human history and see how the spiritual hierarchies appeared, what our relationship was like with them, and also how the human culture and the human form shifted. So that's what we're going to cover today and in the next several lectures. So usually when we look back into our ancient past, it does seem very mysterious. And the reason for this is ultimately because if you go back far enough into human history, it immediately becomes a spiritual conversation because humanity and the earth, when you really look at large swaths of time, were in an astral and etheric condition before they were ever physical. And so there's an intense problem in ideology today because we have become so materialistic in our ideology that we're now trying to make spiritual concepts adhere to materialistic laws or to material laws. So we're trying to take spiritual laws and basically invert them into material laws, which is actually completely incorrect. It creates massive distortions. And in traditional esoterica, any inversion of a law or making it upside down would be, colloquially termed Satanism. And so the materialistic mind will sort of invert things and make them actually satanic, to use a rather intense term, naturally. So materialism will naturally make things satanic, or if you like the anthroposophical term, harmonic. It will invert something that's true and turn it into a lie. And this is what the human mind will do when it sinks too far into materialism to the point that it cannot understand, perceive, or even really enter into a spiritual concept. And so this is where we are as a society, is we live in a spiritual universe, quite literally. The material plane was pretty much the last plane to be formed and is a direct extension and consolidation of prior planes. It's absolutely insane to think that the material plane is the beginning of anything, right? Or that it is somehow defining life or defining the spiritual worlds, or that anything can actually be understood materially first. We have to understand the material plane and everything in it, which means everything that we can naturally perceive or commonly perceive. We have to see that as being material, or at least very close to it, within the spectrum of it. And we have to understand that there are worlds that go beyond that. And that's the only way we're going to understand ourselves, our history, and certainly the spiritual hierarchy. So we have to know that we are coming up against a very darkened minds. Not dark in the sense of evil, but heavy and materialistic. And that is going to tempt humanity to redefine history, to redefine our origins, because the mind actually has to be trained and opened and worked with in order to perceive the spiritual worlds from where we came initially. Okay, so that's the lay of the land. That's something that we have to understand. We have to understand where we are blocked. And even the best mystics, even people in the spiritual scene that are very gifted psychically and mystically and work at this all the time, there is still that urge to make everything material and to view things in a material way. And so this is something you have to be vigilant to not do. And in fact, the most common narratives today in the New Age and ufology are basically a materialistic version or a literal version of spiritual concepts. And that's why people feel so drawn to them and believe them, is because it's sort of like a more comfortable version of the past that doesn't really challenge you to understand things in a broader way. And there's something in it as well, because it is an inversion that is reminiscent of the truth. And that kind of reminiscence or that little core can sometimes be enough to really pull you in, right? So the entire alien god ideology that has absolutely permeated ufology in the New Age is an inversion of the spiritual reality. And it is so because humanity's mind has become a literalist kind of mind that will read a spiritual text and interpret it materialistically, which immediately inverts it and creates a false paradigm. And if that false paradigm is entered into too much, then you're looking at basically creating a virtual reality or a false reality, an artificial reality that is just completely anchoring you into the lower astral plane or the eighth sphere, because you've created a false reality and now you're living in it. And as sovereign beings, as sovereign human beings, we have the power as a creator to create a complete false ideology that harms us, that harms other people, propagate it, believe it's true, and then live within that. That is the challenge of being a sovereign individual, right? So we have to understand that this is the kind of complex situation that we are in. Okay, we have to understand that that's where we are. And so let's dive into the one concept that really seems to be the pivot point or an anchor point within all discussions about humanity's past in regards to alien beings or interdimensionals, or what really are, as we've been discovering in this series, beings from the spiritual hierarchies, or really beings that were cast out of the life wave. That's really actually what we're dealing with, if you want to view it in a proper esoteric perspective or a proper real perspective. Because again, when something is esoteric or spiritual, it doesn't mean that it exists in a dream world and that everything that's in the material plane is just more real and you can just play around with esoteric ideologies on the weekend or something like that. No, it is a reality that's just as real as our physical reality, that exists within a slightly different wavelength. And those wavelengths are directly associated with your level of spiritual initiation, right? So let's get to that one concept. This one concept, no matter what direction you come at human origins from in our ancient past, it always comes down to this one aspect of our past, this one aspect of the human being, our beginnings. And it is when the human being became self-aware, when the human being became conscious, self-conscious. Okay, so self-consciousness and self-awareness is actually what makes a human being a human being. So all of the lower kingdoms of life, not lower as in lesser, less important or less, but lower as in different level of consciousness. All the lesser kingdoms of life, so the animal kingdom, the plant kingdom, the mineral kingdom, and the elemental kingdoms, all of those kingdoms are conscious, but they're not self-conscious. They're not self-aware. It is the human being in the human kingdom which is self-conscious and self-aware. And that's what raises man above the other kingdoms of life and makes man or humanity the steward of the earth, the steward of these lower kingdoms and having an effect on them, right? So what makes a human being human is self-awareness, self-consciousness. And in anthroposophy, this is called the I, the capital I. And this is also associated with when humanity really gets kind of what we would maybe in modern spirituality say like a soul. So self-awareness is sort of like when you really have a soul essence that is continuous in a real sense. There's an awareness of it, which makes it the feeling of it be more continuous. Okay. So this idea of humanity becoming self-aware, becoming self-conscious, basically has two different ways in which that is alleged to happen. Okay. The first way is part of the materialistic conversion. And this is the alien god ideology or the Anunnaki myth. Okay. That is that is probably the most common way that we think human beings became self-aware, is through alien gods, right? It's these alien gods that lifted humanity out of the animal kingdom or out of just being conscious to self-consciousness. That's the jump. That's the evolutionary jump. And it's through aliens. This is what I call in my work the alien god ideology. The second way, which is the classical esoteric teaching, the classical wisdom, the wisdom of the ancients, what we've always known and believed, but that has been absolutely pushed aside by the ancient aliens propaganda that has now permeated for the last 40 and 50 years every single possible spiritual channel or channel in ufology. Okay, so there is a real teaching around this that is the true traditional teaching that has been taught for thousands of years. And it is that the human being of the planet Earth went through a very long process of evolution and metamorphosis, and at the right point in time, suddenly got what they call the spark of mind. In the Eastern teachings, this is called manas, M-A-N-A-S, manas. And this is the reception of the mind, the thinking mind, the ability to be objective, do calculations, but also be self-aware. Okay. And this occurred really in that period at the end of Lemuria into Atlantis. That's when we became self-aware. That's when we got the spark of mind, the soul spark or manas. And so it was really the first inward metamorphosis that we experienced, because earlier periods of human development were really all about creating a form, creating a body. We were in a materialization impulse, and we really had to create the human body, template the human form. We had to have all of the organs that we have. We had to have, our nervous system, our blood system, our limbic system, our water systems. And all of that is actually a direct representation of the cosmos. So we had to have a form first that was physically a microcosm of the macrocosm. And so once that was achieved by the Lemurian epoch, humanity began to, one by one, receive the spark of mind or manas. It's called manas also in theosophy, because theosophy teaches more towards the Eastern tradition, okay? And so in theosophy and in the Eastern traditions, this is when humanity received the impulse of self-awareness of mind. And in anthroposophy, we call that the I, the individuality, because once you get self-awareness, once you become self-conscious, you obviously can work upon yourself. And there's a whole other part of evolution and development and metamorphosis that happens once somebody becomes self-aware, because then they can actually understand themselves as a sovereign individual in the cosmos. Okay. So this one major event of humanity really becoming human and becoming self-aware is the one thing that when we talk about our ancient past, it always comes up. And there's a lot of disagreement over exactly how that occurred. So let's go a little bit deeper into what the alien god narrative says about people becoming finally human. Human meaning self-aware. So in the alien god ideology, awareness at a human level is basically caused through a physical modification. So in the Sitchin work, you quite literally, I believe, have him placing humanity as being created in a petri dish. So that's how the human being of the earth became conscious. They took what they call angelic DNA, which is really overwhelmingly described as an alien, as an actual physical alien coming here in crafts and taking your genetics from you and then merging it, doing all these experiments, right? Like alien god scientists, and then finally getting the right mix. And generally it is a mix of some kind of ape, so basically an animal, and then their DNA, and it is their DNA and their actually act of genetically modifying this animal that makes human beings conscious, that makes human beings self-aware. So that's why you and I and every human being are basically capable of any kind of complex thought, any kind of connection or knowledge of God, of the sort of out there ideas, esoteric ideology. All of that really comes from these alien gods who just kind of happened upon our planet, these kind of colonizers who kind of come and do these genetic experiments, and that's how we became conscious. The other way that you can sometimes see is that humanity was essentially in the animal kingdom as an ape, and these Anunnaki alien gods came and also mated with these apes, and that is how humanity essentially became conscious. So what this ideology says is that the human being on the earth is conscious, is creative, is aware, is capable of religious feelings or spiritual thoughts. All of that massive level of development is because an alien came to the planet and fiddled around with our genetics, and it's because of them that we have, and that's what they say made in our image is. And there are many, many, many people who believe this. And the reason why so many people believe that is because this is currently what society is obsessed with. Okay. Society is absolutely obsessed with playing God. And, now every single one of these has to be a genetic modification. Gone are the days when we would harmonize with nature, with each other, with our bodies, because ultimately there's something higher in everything in creation. And if we harmonize with that and we learn to do that, not only can we heal ourselves, but we can gain deep, meaningful understanding about why we were sick in the first place, or about why something is happening to begin with. So we're also becoming more and more obsessed with believing that if we can perfect the form, even in the most mundane sense of like, if you can perfect your personal appearance, right? But if you can perfect the form, by adding machine parts or microchips or nanites or whatever it is, then that is going to lead to evolution in the future, right? So because we're in this materialistic ideology, we think that we actually evolve through making changes to the form, making changes actually physically through something like transhumanism, but also genetically, that we actually have the omniscient power to mess around with genes and like not have anything happen 20 or 30 years down the line. That is an absolute dangerous kind of arrogance, to think that you are omniscient enough in your own consciousness to go into genetics and work something out, to change, to heal a disease, to do this kind of stuff through genetics. Like, you scientists are omniscient enough about what the genetic code really is that you can go in there and start messing around. I mean, this is a dangerous height of arrogance. Okay. And we're on a very slippery slope, and it did not begin today, even though we're seeing it everywhere. It did not begin today. It began with this alien God ideology and with the Mars line that is aggressively propagating this ideology. And this is why you also see so many people experiencing horrific abduction situations where, again, it's all about, genetic modification. It's all about these weird, dark, golem-like beings that are essentially trying to take human genetics and modify themselves into the human being. The number one abduction scenario is to have your genetics taken. For women, many times that also includes seeing quite literally bizarre hybrid children, and even brainwashing, psychological brainwashing to like feel love towards these things. So the thing with the Mars line and the fallen line of humanity and the fallen angels and the eighth sphere and the lower astral plane is that those beings, and again, these beings have an astral counterpart, and then they also have golems that are created on the earth. So that's where the chimeras come from, the grays, all of that. These are golems, these are chimeras that are created to basically ensoul beings from the eighth sphere, from the lower astral plane, right? So they exist in the astral plane and they exist in the physical plane, okay? And so what ends up happening is that if you stand back and you look, you can see that it is this degenerated Mars line, this fallen angel line, that is absolutely obsessed to the point that it is their survival, it is their religion to mess around with the human genome. And this goes all the way back to even trying to make humanity believe that they began through genetic modification. This is their religion. This is the fallen angel, and it is satanic religion that tries to change the human origin story into a story of genetic manipulation, or into a story where human beings were animals and alien beings were the beings that made them self-aware. Okay, this is hijacking human history. It's hijacking human development. And if you believe this and you take it on, your own mind and your own being will begin to lower, because you can't hold a belief within your heart that is a lie and that degenerates your actual divine existence, right? So these ideas are so seductive. The idea that we were created through genetic modification or aliens created us is because they're very materialistic. It is pretty much what happens when people go into ancient spiritual texts and read them with a literal view, not understanding that spiritual texts, especially the older they are, most of that is written in metaphors, in stories, and they're not meant to be read literally. One of the most bizarre things I think I've seen is both Von Daniken from the Chariots of the Gods series and Zachariah Sitchin from his 12th Planet series is their argument where they're like, we've looked back and we've read all these ancient texts, and we think they were describing something that really happened. We don't think that they were speaking in euphemisms or whatever. We think that they were talking about something that really happened, and this is always played on ancient aliens too. And the reality is no, that's not how our ancestors spoke about spiritual things. Consciousness, human consciousness, especially 6,000 years ago, right? Or 8,000 years ago, even up to the Greek period, even up to the incarnation of Christ, they actually understood things in stories and myths. And stories and myths were like a technology that allowed the human being to understand things. And so we actually worked through symbology, through symbols, through stories. We didn't work literally because it took a long time for humanity to really gain that sort of literal understanding of things, or to see something as literal. In anthroposophy, we notice that happened in about the 1500s. We finally began to see things as more literal. Some people perhaps had the capacity earlier, but that's around the time that happens, and that's also where materialistic science begins and where things get really messed up. But no, in our ancient past, we didn't think of things as we think of them now. So you can't go back and read Genesis literally. You can't go back and read, any ancient religion's books and say they are describing something literal. Because the creation myths, and that is what we're talking about. We're not talking about like some scribe literally counting how many bottles of wine are stored, or them describing a literal event. I'm talking about spiritual texts and creation myths. Spiritual texts and creation myths were done in a mythology form, in a story form, because that's how humanity dealt with the spiritual plane. Because in that period, they still saw planets as beings. You see Venus is Inanna, the moon is Selene, right? We still saw not the physical planet, but when you looked up in the sky, you primarily saw an entity there. And so human consciousness did not perceive the cosmos the same way for thousands of years. And we can tell because even if we look at the Greeks and the Romans, which really were not that long ago, we can see that they're still perceiving and acknowledging the planetary spheres as beings, because they identify every single planetary sphere with a person. Zeus is Jupiter, right? Hera, Aphrodite. Okay, there's elaborate stories about them. Eros. So they're seeing the planetary spheres as beings, and it's not until around the 1500s or so that materialistic science really starts to gain, and we no longer see the planets as beings and as the home of spiritual beings, but primarily we slowly began to shift and see them as material objects. This very different ideology, right? So part of the reason why we have this alien god ideology is through not understanding how to read spiritual texts. And, looking at these things as though it's a literal story and not understanding that that's not how they were written. Okay, they weren't literalists then. They were symbolists. And that's very clear when we look at our ancient history, especially, when the more spiritual it becomes, the more symbolic it is, the more archetypal it is. That's just how it was. Okay, so in the alien god ideology, self-awareness or human consciousness is given to humanity from the outside, from an external event, through the merging of genetics. And through merging genetics, the conscious human being of the earth was created, right? So you actually have to have someone mechanically there taking an ape or taking an animal and rising them into the human kingdom by genetically modifying them. How sustainable is this, right? Think about this in a pluralistic sense. How did the Anunnaki become self-conscious and self-aware? Were they just, that's just who they are? How did they get that awareness? If evolution is universal law, if metamorphosis is law across the universe, and it clearly is, how did the Anunnaki, how did these alien gods become self-aware? Riddle me that. How did they get their divine spark of eye? How did they become self-aware? How did they become conscious? They're special and they developed it naturally and we're not. They had to give it to us. Is that what's going on? So we're eternally beneath them and we eternally need these genetic modifications to continue to evolve us. Is that where this is going? Is that why this is happening? Is that why it's being pushed as the greatest thing since sliced bread? Is that why genetic modification is being pushed as the greatest thing to hit mankind? It's nonsensical. It doesn't make sense. It makes sense, though, if you want to get people under your thumb. It is a stroke of evil genius if you want to control an entire planet. That's where it makes sense. And that's why we have to absolutely wholeheartedly reject the alien god ideology. Okay. According to the alien god ideology, human beings were apes and were apes before they were human and not self-aware. The alien god ideology does not acknowledge humanity as being aware during the Lemurian and Atlantean periods, though naturally and spiritually oriented in evolution. So the alien god ideology doesn't see human awareness as sort of developing over a long period of time as the human form was shifting and preparing itself, right? So if you look at like how human awareness really developed, there were different rates at which as to which people became self-aware, right? It wasn't even all at the same time. And so essentially the alien god ideology really gets rid of nuance. It removes nuance. Okay. Now let's get into the genuine esoteric teachings of how humans became humans on the planet, how we became self-aware. As you've been watching this series, you already understand that humanity develops through metamorphosis, and that every single planetary epoch, something is developed that is new and something of the past is released. And so the planet and the human being really go through metamorphosis in different stages. And the human being always evolves with their planet. And the human being is like the embodiment of the planet. It's a planet made flesh, but also the sun made flesh. So the human being is really the microcosm of the earth and of the sun. And the human being kind of stands in between both those things. And the whole goal of the spiritual hierarchies is to keep humanity developing and going through these important metamorphoses over time, because the human being has to be in step with the development of the rest of the cosmos. And so that's why we actually go through metamorphosis, is that human beings come to be at a certain time, right? And go through very specific developmental cycles that can be absolutely traced, tracked, and known and understood. It's not a mystery, because everything is a recapitulation of a greater pattern. It's not a mystery. You just have to spend the time to learn it and study it. So humanity goes through its very beginnings and then goes through a precise process of metamorphosis with the cosmos at a certain time. And then once it goes through a certain series of cycles, the human being actually reaches ultimately a level of mastership or of significantly higher consciousness. Now, in anthroposophy, this is associated with the Vulcan development. And it's also in the Eastern teachings, it was associated with the Atman, or the solar being, or when human beings finally reach the ultimate level of angelship or mastership. So there's a very sophisticated, beautiful reason why you exist that's deeply nourishing, that's deeply spiritual, that is so ingrained and important to who you are, that when you learn spiritual science to understand it, your life gets so much better, because you see that once you get this core concept of human metamorphosis through the Polarian epoch, through the Hyperborean epoch, through the Lemurian epoch, the Atlantean epoch, the post-Atlantean epoch, and you even dive into seeing how all these recapitulations work in the future, it brings so much meaning to your life. And also it removes the chaos of our time, because you can see that a lot of the things that are going on are really recapitulations of things that have already happened in the past. So a lot of the chaos, a lot of the pain, a lot of the trauma, a lot of the corruption is quite literally because we don't understand our past and we don't understand who we are. Okay, so this is what we're up against. So, as I mentioned, anytime you start getting into this starseed ideologies, cosmic spirituality that deals with like aliens or interdimensionals, or what I like to say, the spiritual hierarchies, it always comes down to, when did humanity become human? When did humanity become self-aware? And there's usually an origin myth around it. And it's usually that aliens did it. Or if you go back and you actually read the teachings, it's that the spiritual hierarchies did it, or the spiritual hierarchies didn't do it. The spiritual hierarchies have assisted us, and the spiritual hierarchies are associated with certain planetary spheres at certain times, right? So it's not alien, it's not extraterrestrial at all. And in fact, calling the spiritual hierarchies alien or extraterrestrial is a marker of an intensely materialistic mindset and just not understanding the reality of the cosmos. It's not even understanding the spiritual reality of the cosmos. It's just understanding the reality of what the cosmos are. Because when you look at the sky, when you look at the cosmos, it is pretty much a spiritual experience, because all of those are quite literally symbols. Every planet, every star is a symbol. It symbolizes part of our own development. That's why the sky was considered such a spiritual thing to the ancients. They understood exactly what we covered in this series. We look back at them and think, oh my God, they they built this ridiculous rudimentary bowl, or they, why were they doing this or that or whatever? Well, they actually had a deep knowing and understanding of the spiritual hierarchies and how the spiritual hierarchies manifest in the sky, and what the stars meant and what the planets mean. And it wasn't that they're a rock floating in the sky, I'll tell you that, to be mined or to be modified or whatever. That's not at all what they thought. That is a sickness that we have today. Okay. So in genuine esoteric teachings, and you can find this in the Eastern traditions, it's very clear. In the Hindu tradition, it's very clear. In most Eastern traditions that have some kind of cosmology in there. But it's also very clear in the Western traditions. Okay, it's clear in the Bible, it's clear in anthroposophy, it's clear in theosophy that human beings gain self-awareness as part of our natural development, and that we are assisted in that process by angels. And angels are beings from the spiritual hierarchy, which we are also a part of. That's the teaching. That's it. And so the other key concept is that humanity actually gains awareness through the sacrifice of angelic beings. Now, this is very, very important. Nothing can be given to the human form in a mass sense, or to the human template, like the spark of consciousness, unless angels sacrifice themselves. So the reason why humanity actually gained the spark of self-awareness, why humanity really became human and conscious, was because angelic beings sacrificed their own essence to give humanity that. Because sacrifice is the act that allows something to be given to humanity en masse. And I'm going to go deeper into this, because this requires absolutely a lecture series on alone to understand the intricate details of this. But we can clearly see this in the story of Christ, where the sacrifice that he gave was necessary for the essence of Christ to permeate the collective consciousness and the earth. And you can also see this in the Eastern story of Sunat Kumara, who actually had to have sacrifice his self in the same way, or very similar way, in order to give humanity a certain capacities as well. So like every capacity we have is because an angelic being has sacrificed themselves and their entire existence, basically, to translate their energy into a capacity. And they can do that because they're in a higher dimensional plane initially. Okay. And so this is a very key esoteric secret or law, is the law of sacrifice, and what sacrifice does. And it even creates immense change in our own personal life. The moment that you live a life of releasing your ego and living a life of service, and you get to that level of your development, absolute magic does happen in your life. And so there is a very mystical, sacred law around sacrifice, including in earlier levels of humanity, when the actual capacity of mind was given to us by angels from the Venusian sphere or the Venusian plane. Okay, and that's the core secret to the Sunat Kumara story. It's a Christ. It's a kind of Christ story before Christ, as we know it, was able to come through, because the Christ is an impulse. It's a stream that permeates the entire cosmos. That is the evolutionary force that catalyzes, awakens, and evolves all consciousness. And it is associated with the sun and the solar spirits and the solar beings, in which Christ is one. Okay? Christ is actually the greatest, the highest of the solar spirits. And that is in the anthroposophical work as well. Okay? So let's take a moment and think and just compare and contrast that. The reality is that incredible higher angelic beings sacrifice their own self, their own essence, just so humanity could have a shot at becoming self-aware. The spark of mind, the divine spark of mind, is due to the sacrifice of a great being, their entire essence, their sacrifice. What we have today in modern ufology, in modern starseed stuff, starseed channeled literature, the cosmic community, that's gone. That's not even talked about, despite the actual, oftentimes the Venusian story or the Sunat Kumara story being the actual reason why the starseed movement exists, why the alien god theory even exists. The entire reason why is left out. And it's replaced with genetic engineering, genetic modification, and this alien, the idea that human beings became aware not through sacrifice, but through just simple genetic modification. So be very aware that this story about human beings being created in a petri dish, or that aliens are the missing link between apes and man, or aliens are our creators, what that is doing to your mind and to humanity's mind is removing the sacrifice of the angels for us to have the capacity of self-awareness. It is quite literally removing the actual sacrifice that allows us to even communicate right now. That's how sick that is. That's how dark that is. You can't create self-awareness in a petri dish. Okay, that's mental illness. Let's just say what that is. That is just mental illness. That is literally not understanding an ounce of spiritual reality. That's not understanding an ounce of the occult, of spiritual knowledge. That is just creating a weird image because that's what we're interested in doing today, and that's what the dark forms do anyway. And I've already gone into detail about why fallen entities and beings in the eighth sphere propagate genetic modification as evolution, as how we're going to evolve in the future, and how we began is because they need to enter the life wave because they're inhuman, and the only way to move forward is to enter into the human stream, the human template. So that's why that exists, okay? It exists so dark entities can quite literally enter the form, and we can stop it today if we just understand what's going on and how vicious this ideology is and what it's actually doing and what it's actually gaining favor for. It's a big deal. It's a really big deal. Okay. So we got the spark of mind. We became self-aware as part of our natural evolution, right? As part of the human being's natural evolution. During planetary and human development, beings that have already achieved the level that we are at today have an opportunity to sacrifice themselves to give us a capacity that they have. That is the secret to the masters, to human evolution, to planetary evolution in the cosmos, is that there's always beings that have achieved something that another planet hasn't, or that it's not really another planet, that's too plural. It is, there is sort of like a higher development of the earth, right? It's always within our own system. And when the more dense planetary sphere forms as an exact representative of Venus, right, and the sun, the group of human souls, of human beings that have already achieved a certain level of consciousness and self-awareness, they sacrifice themselves for the lower world that is forming beneath them. Okay, because the earth is a direct incarnation of Venus. And so they don't see it as another planet, they see it as a continuation of their own, and the human being as a continuation of their own line. But it is Earth at the same time. There is a singularity to it. There is a separateness because the Earth is also receiving impulses from other lesser planets as well. Does that make sense? So Venus is that initiating force for the Earth, but the Earth also has impulses from other times as well. And so in order for those beings to actually gift us what they have to sacrifice themselves. And in that sacrifice, the spark of mind is given to every human form. Just like when Christ died on the cross and his blood entered the earth, there was a quality of Christ that was given to every human being. That is how it works. Sacrifice is how it works. That is how a gift is given to humanity from an angel. That's it. And if we don't understand that, we cannot develop the capacities that we have. So if you think that the reason why you're a thinking aware person is because some alien created you in a petri dish, you will rob yourself of actually developing the capacity because you don't even understand what it is or how you got it. Part of being able to become more spiritual, more self-aware, is actually understanding how we got the gift to begin with. How can we develop something? How can we become more psychic? How can we become more spiritual, more knowledgeable? We don't even know how we got awareness. There comes a point where you cannot use, there comes a point where the alien God ideology will destroy your mind because it is a lie. And we need to understand that very squarely. So, self-awareness or humanness arises in humanity naturally as part of our development. This does not happen through breeding. You can't breed different levels of awareness and then create human awareness. Because once the spark of mind is freely given through sacrifice from higher beings, that mind spark animates humanity's past and future. So it actually illuminates humanity in all directions of time naturally as a natural thing. Because it was given from a higher plane to the lower plane, it is seamlessly given. And it acts as an illumination. This is why the beings from Venus were called the Lords of the Flame. Because they just gave illumination. This is also why people who were apparently highly developed in spiritual thinking were called the Illuminati, the illuminated ones. This is why Lucifer was called the light bearer, and why the Venusians are portrayed as a light bearer like Columbia, the Statue of Liberty. It's because these are the lords of the flame in very early human development, right? These are the angels that gave humanity mind, self-awareness, capacity to think, capacity to do calculations, to think objectively. They had to sacrifice themselves to give humanity knowledge. Okay? So, but that does not mean, but when that happens, it just illuminates everything on Earth. It doesn't, so you can't like splice it in physically. It has to, the only way you can actually get mind in a way that can evolve and go through metamorphosis, it has to be given from the spiritual plane downwards. And that's how the human being remains sovereign. If you can't splice it into the genome, right? That's not how that works. It's actually an illumination of a developing being. Everything becomes illuminated, right? It's just adding another layer. And that's not done through like physicality, through genetically like modifying. That's not how that's done. So this does not happen through breeding or through genetic modification, but through the sacrifice of beings within the angelic hierarchy that have already achieved it. This means that human beings became conscious and aware by spiritual initiation and through connection, not through physical tampering or modifications. So this is another really great point, which is that once the spark of mind is given to the human being, every single life that you live, and you live many on this planet, you have to develop that spark of mind. You have to learn to think. You have to develop your eye. You have to become conscious. You have to become aware. And the more conscious and aware you become, the more compassionate you become, the more loving you become, because ironically, the more you develop your individuality, your eye, your self-awareness, the more you love others. People who don't love others, people who are cruel, people who have hatred actually have no self-awareness and no self-development, right? That's evil. That's evilness. So when we get our eye, when we get our individuality, we're at our most individuated state. And when that develops fully, and honestly, we actually become the most loving and compassionate because we realize we're interconnected with everything and everyone. And so that's the beautiful paradox of becoming a true individual, is that when you truly, truly develop your eye, your awareness, your consciousness, yourself, you become so compassionate and so loving, because through the knowing of yourself, you know everyone and you know God. That's how interconnected everything is, and that's why it's an illumination, okay? And you, in every single life that you live, you have to develop your eye. You have to develop that consciousness and self-awareness. You pass away and you get to keep what you develop, you know, especially if you make sacrifices in your life for something greater than yourself. You're just like how the angels sacrifice for us. If you make sacrifices in your life to better yourself or to better the world, your development increases 10, 20 fold, and you get on a rapid path, right? And so it's so incredibly insulting to say that humanity was just like given awareness by these aliens, because that actually takes away the slow process that every soul has to go through to integrate the eye, to integrate that spark of mind they were given. Because suddenly the human form on the earth had the capacity to think and to be sovereign. And you had to work that into your being, life after life after life after life. You had to do that. It can't just be given to a form through genetic modification. That is denying every soul's progression, where this energy of the eye, of self-awareness was worked into you, and you worked upon yourself to develop it. Once it was given to the form, you had to develop that organ yourself. And you had to go through a slow metamorphosis over time, every life, learning. That's called karma and dharma, right? So that is why this is also so important, is that you see the real process of illumination in the soul. Okay. By associating the rising of human consciousness with genetic manipulation, or simply merging physical things together, we remove the sacrifice of the higher beings. And when we do that, we remove our own core consciousness, our own core of consciousness within ourselves, because they are us and we are them. And by not acknowledging that and not acknowledging them, we can regress. Okay? we remove our ability to connect with the actual processes within that lead to the evolution of our consciousness. So it's very clear, if we don't understand our genuine origins, including how the human being gained all these capacities, then we don't get to develop them. Because you can't really develop a capacity, again, that you don't understand. You don't understand, if you don't understand how humanity received it, how it came to be, then you can't work very closely with it. You're only ever going to be outside of it. Because even on an elemental level, the elemental forces in your being that are moving that energy are associated with the beings that gave it to you, the real beings that gave it to us, which were angels. So the capacity of our mind and of our eye is always going to be associated with something higher than ourselves. And there's a truth to it. If we don't acknowledge that truth, we don't really have access to that energy within ourselves. And that is the energy that actually evolves us. Okay. So that's why this is so important. So the last part of this lecture is going to be about a couple key concepts that I want to really hammer home so that we can, move forward. So the angels that came from Venus had essentially already achieved the human level of development in an earlier cycle of cosmic development. So they were one developmental cycle ahead of humanity. And when the Earth came into being, it's like a lower version of Venus. And those beings willfully, many beings, a group of beings from Venus willfully sacrifice their own selves to evolve the Earth. And that is what's required when the Earth was formed. Okay, and that's also what keeps the Earth connected with Venus and the rest of the solar system, is this sharing of forces, okay? And that's also why you can even see that spiritual initiation is formed that way. Spiritual initiation is associated with certain planetary spheres. It is very reminiscent of these earlier cycles of development where we gain certain capacities through enmeshing and through different ways. It's always how it was portrayed in mystery schools as well. So just to hammer this home, it's not correct to look at Venus as though it's a physical world. The physical sphere of Venus is marking the realm, a higher realm. So the planetary sphere of Venus, that orbit, looking at the geocentric model, so beginning with the Earth as the center of the cosmos, not the sun, not heliocentric, geocentric. And then you look at Venus, okay? You look at Venus, the orbit of Venus, that is a realm of the Earth. The planet Venus, physical, is marking a realm of our own planet. And so when Venus, if you look at Venus using modern language, like 5D, okay, or the higher plane, there's a point where the Earth and Venus are one. There's no separation between them. But just like how we split into genders in Lemuria, the planets also split as they move into a lower density. And remember, every planet is an expression of the sun. As density increases, the sun splits into planets, okay? So this idea that like sometimes I'll read these snarky articles like, oh, the weird theosophists or the weird anthroposophists, they think that like there's people living on the planet Venus. No, we don't think that. Nobody in theosophy thinks that. Nobody in anthroposophy thinks that. That's stupid. It's different dimensional planes, okay? We're looking at a spiritual ideology, okay? It's different planes. And these different planes are associated with different levels of human consciousness. They're not just even like, for example, a higher plane, like the astral plane, is not just like the astral plane, a shared plane. The higher planes are not just simply physical matter that's vibrating at a faster rate. so that it creates a different substance. The higher planes are actually, the human being actually has to be transformed to enter them. The only plane that the human being can enter untransformed is the eighth sphere, or the lower planes. The human being's consciousness can enter the lower astral plane of the eighth sphere all day long without being transformed, which means without being healed, without going through the alchemical change of interacting with Christ. Okay, you can enter the eighth sphere all day long and talk to, lower entities and fallen angels and demonic beings, and they can show up in the garbs of Christ, and they can show up in the garbs of Buddha. They can show up as an alien all day long, and people do, and they think that they're interacting with the higher realms, because that's how the lower astral plane works. It is a realm of masks and illusions and mirrors, right? To get beyond that, it's not just simply speeding up particles or moving faster. You actually have to be transformed in your nature through the Christ forces to get beyond the eighth sphere. So the higher planes, the genuine higher planes of the Earth's development or of the solar system, are of a transformed nature. It's not just that matter or physicality or earth matter is simply sped up into a more subtle, finer version. That's not what we're looking at. That's a materialistic view. Okay. The higher planes, the genuinely timeless planes, where you're outside time as we know it, where you are, truly in a different realm, truly not in the lower planes and in the eighth sphere anymore. That requires an individual to transform themselves through the Christ force within them. All right, including Venus. So in other words, the higher planes are, in order to truly get into these higher worlds where there is no darkness in that way, you have to transform yourself. You have to heal yourself. You have to transfigure yourself. You don't just speed up your energy like in a machine or something, like a time machine you can go into and suddenly be outside time and do all this incredible stuff through technology. No, that is just messing around with the eighth sphere. You actually have to change the quality of your entire being through the sun or through Christ within your heart. And I have a lecture on this called The Etherization of the Blood. You actually have to etherize yourself. You actually have to spiritually transform yourself to match the transformed nature of the higher planes. So the higher planes are actually the higher plane that is above the earth heaven is actually the energy of the human being that has integrated Christ. That's what the plane of Venus is, and that's what the plane of the sun is, and that's what also associated with Mercury development as well. So we really have to understand that to get into the higher planes, it requires transfiguration. It requires transubstantiation and the transformation of your form through the internal Christ essence within you. If that doesn't occur, then there is no entrance into those higher planes. There's none. But what you can enter into all day long using your mind is the lower plane, is the eighth sphere. There's no transformation needed for that, because the eighth sphere is also associated with the lunar realm, the darkest part of the lunar realm. And that is actually made of the same essence of the earth. So it's just a lower form of it. Okay, so we really have to understand that, because sometimes I see these like I see these weird interviews and stuff with people who are, like these whistleblowers from the military or government officials or whatever, and they describe technologies as though these technologies can do anything. These technologies can ship you across time and space, and you can just go into the cosmos and just zippity anywhere you want. And it's like, technology actually cannot do these things. It can do certain things. It can tear holes in the veil. It can do certain limited amounts of things like that. but technology cannot transubstantiate your form. Therefore, it cannot truly time travel to the greatest degrees and, go into these different, you can't like get in a machine or have a machine take you to like the 10th dimension. And like this, the kind of things that people say technology can do is absolutely crazy, and it can't. And that's a lie as well. In order to actually do these incredible things, you have to evolve your form to do those things, right? Like when you hear about the masters and even angels, they don't show up in a ship, okay? A spiritual master just appears in your home, in your room. An angel will just appear here. There's no need to show up in any kind of ship. There's no need to use any kind of technology. Technology is not the sign of an advanced individual or an advanced being. Technology and people who are religious around technology, like Yuval Noah Harari, who literally thinks he can, upload his brain, his whole soul into like a machine. This is mental illness. This is mental illness that we have accepted because we are so entrenched in materialism, right? And you can't do any of that with technology. All you can do is mess around with the lower astral plane with technology. That's it. That's all you can do is poke around in the abyss. You can't do any of these actual advanced things, because once the human form actually does begin to spiritually develop through the essence of Christ within, that's where you can actually develop the ability to bilocate, to astrally project. You build your resurrection body, right? So you don't die. These are spiritual things that we can develop life after life through focusing on spiritual development, through inward development, and through Christ within us. So all of this weird physical modification stuff, and even like technology, you cannot achieve an internal feat, a spiritual feat, something that requires a spiritual feat, through a technology. All of that is a delusion, right? And the catch is that if you are very spiritually developed, the technologies can work a lot better. But only when somebody is extremely spiritually developed can there be a harmony created. But then when you get extremely spiritually developed, like I said, you'd never use these technologies. Okay? You don't need them. You can tell when you've actually been still and developed yourself. You actually have incredible abilities. You have incredible capacities. You don't need a chip in your brain to make you clairvoyant. You don't need like a chip in your brain to read the Akashic records or connect with other people in a group mind. You know that you're already connected and you just become aware of it. So we have to be very aware of a lot of the weird delusions that we're being told, that like technology can achieve things that it can't, and making technology this heroic force in society. No, the heroic force in society is within you, and it is the Christ essence, and that is what transforms you. Again, if you are visited by a master, by Christ, by an angel, they don't show up in your backyard in a ship. All right. It's not what they're doing. That's not how they work. They are actually intimately part of nature. They can enmesh. It is a natural thing that we all can do when we return to our true self, which is Christ within. And so I bring this up because also a lot of people who tend to believe in the alien God ideology, it very quickly turns into, the idea that, I heard one individual say that they're in communication with a race of beings who is billions of years ahead of humanity in development. And in my mind, if you have a spiritual being, from the angelic hierarchy in the cosmos, that is billions of years ahead of humanity, they're non-physical. Like humanity and beings in the universe only physicalize for a very small period of time. and then they have to spiritualize back out of matter. So we materialize, right, into the human form, into matter, and then we have to spiritualize out of it. This is law for all planets, right? This is the law of the universe, of development. And so it's like there's people that think that human development is technology, that when humans become very developed, they suddenly have this like really advanced technology that like sees into the future, or like we just become like hyper technological. No, actually, when human beings become extremely developed, they don't need any technology. We use technology briefly in this material part of our development to remove some of the burdens of the mundane so we can focus inwardly, and so that we can have we can personally develop. So we develop a certain amount of technology so that we can, do our laundry faster, cook food faster, and we don't have to like hunt and gather all the time, so we can focus on our mind and focus on inner development. So we're supposed to have some degree of technology, but our whole, the human being and the planet's evolution and development is not defined by how advanced the technology is. And so this is a very kind of sick ideology that we're quickly going into, where spiritual development is going by the wayside, and we're very quickly thinking that development is technology, and that is our future. And you can see people who are apparently, in communication with all these alien beings, or these alien beings, and they're like, there are billions of years more advanced than us. Well, listen, if an alien being was billions of years advanced, that is basically like an ascended master, incredible solar being that does not use technology, right? So we have to understand how our own spiritual development can be stolen from us by the repeated externalization of our own development into things like technology, genetic. Like, this is not how a society evolves. This is not how humanity evolves. This is how demonic entities and dark beings tell you that you evolve, because it actually gets you to not evolve and focus outwardly on genes or technology. These are external things that have nothing to do with advancement. A society is not advanced because it has some kind of technology that's impressive. Society becomes advanced when we become compassionate, when we become loving, when violence ceases, because we've all become so self-aware that to hurt another person is to hurt ourselves. When we seek to understand each other and know that if someone is hurting and they are suffering, that the greatest joy is to sit with that person and have God work through you to try to bring that person into some kind of center in which they can come home to themselves. That is advancement. Advancement is compassion. Advancement is love. And we cannot sit by for one moment and think that just because you made some contraption that thins the veil into the eighth sphere, or that extends your life a few hundred years, or whatever it is, that now you're advanced. It's the opposite. An advanced society is defined by its ability to love and be compassionate, understanding that all advancement comes through Christ, through God, moving through each individual, and allowing God to work through you, and the sheer joy and thrill of that. The joy and the thrill of being in harmony with God and with everything around you, and the deep peace that comes from that is advancement. The ability to go inward and be still, to observe yourself, to face your fears. That is advancement. Why are we redefining it into something that is technological? It is to avoid the reality of what real advancement is. And we do not need to fall into the clutches of a bizarre technocratic society to figure this out. We can figure it out now. We can act upon it now. We can push away these distorted, Martian, dark ideologies now within ourselves. And we can walk a much higher path. Okay, so the next thing is that any planet that you see in the sky, any planet that you can perceive, is actually another development. Okay, so every planet is its own developmental system, right? Every sun is its own developmental system. Okay, if we can perceive it, that means that there is some kind of connection to it at some point. If it's another star system, there really isn't any way to comprehend it because everything goes through our own sun. But how you view a star is not as as though it's a burning ball of gas or plasma. You don't understand things like that. That's a dead end. You have to see every star and every planet as being another developmental system. And if we can perceive it, there is some rough, at some point, connection to ourselves. Anything that is, there are things in existence that, of course, have no connection to us, hypothetically, but we cannot perceive them because perception is directly associated with our own creation in the cosmos. So when we view like the moon or other stars or other planets as just, separate bodies and material bodies, that actually ingrains us in a feeling and an ideology of separateness, of alienness, and of foreignness. And then before you know it, you have, whistleblowers coming forward and the disclosure movement, and they keep talking about aliens being these weird, mysterious things that we can't figure out, their technology being like unrelatable. And it's like, this is how humanity becomes controlled, is by developing an ideology that is a lie, that is that we can't know what a being from another plane is. Yes, you can. The human being can know what every being that enters this plane is. It's called spiritual development. It's called developing those senses, that awareness. Just like anything else, you have to call, just like if you want to be a great writer or you want to be a great plumber, or you have to develop the skill set, right? So anything that appears, that manifests on our planet from another sphere, from another realm, right? Yeah, we absolutely have the ability to know exactly what that is, where it's coming from, why it's here. You absolutely have the ability to discern that. That is within you. So this whole thing about, the disclosure movement and the whistleblowers coming forward, and it's like, we've got these alien bodies, we've got these crafts. Where are the aliens coming from? I don't know. Oh my gosh, this is bizarre. It's not reality. It's a materialistic ideology that has taken humanity, that's creating all these distortions, and we're not interacting with the idea as we should. And the more distorted like this it becomes, the more easily manipulated we are, because it's their lie. And we're just within their lie. So we actually have to create a counter movement where we discuss this properly, we develop these higher capacities, these higher abilities, so we can confront the reality of this issue. If you're genuinely interested. If you're genuinely interested in understanding what other spheres are, what other beings are, that is the path. You have to spiritually develop. and make sacrifices in your life to do that. But I think a lot of people also like the alien God ideology. They like the disclosure movement because it doesn't require any sacrifices from them. It doesn't require any internal development. And there's this secret desire within them to just be told who they are and go into this group hive mind that is currently being offered in the disclosure scene, where you just get told who you are. You get this weird paradigm about what aliens are and technology, and you just kind of get caught up in that whole bizarre community, right? And you're not actually understanding what a planet is. You're not understanding what different beings are and why, and you're not understanding the spiritual science around it at all. You're literally just interacting with a lie. It does nothing for you when you go into the disclosure scene. Okay, that all that stuff is a waste of time. Okay, there is a huge movement to want to pull humanity into incredible delusions about what the cosmos is and about what higher beings are, because that is the knowledge that we are supposed to come into. So that is a counter movement. And also that leads humanity into, the typical disclosure conversations, how we approach it as, these are foreign alien beings. The cosmos exists as only a 3D thing with no consideration of what they are spiritual, even though that was how, a spiritual cosmos was how we literally viewed it for thousands of years. Now, suddenly in the last 60, like, we know it all. And so what ends up happening if you go along with the typical disclosure conversations that are extremely materialist is that you get a meaningless, chaotic cosmos where you don't perceive what a planetary sphere really is, and you don't understand what spiritual beings are. You don't understand your beginnings, and and it's all basically meaningless and chaotic. That's basically what it means. And science, of course, these probably what will happen is that humanity becomes primed through the weird disclosure movement, which is heavily controlled by 3-letter agencies and the most corrupt government imaginable. And then eventually the sane centering force are going to be these scientist priests. So science becomes the central centering point in the chaos. Instead of spirit, instead of your own center, your own heart, and God and Christ becoming the coherent part of you and of the cosmos, it is these weird scientific priests like Avi Loeb or, that Nolan guy, right? These people come forward and they're scientists, and they're here to bring the order in this meaningless, chaotic cosmos that they've created, where they've made every single planet and being foreign and material, and we have to all understand it through the only paradigm we can accept, which is science, because it's the only thing that we can really perceive or know for sure. And humanity will probably be in so much fear at that point that we'll agree with that, because in order to really become, sink into our spirituality, we have to be at some level of comfort usually, right? So there's a whole operation going on right now. And I hope that you can see it. I hope that you can begin to see what I'm talking about, because it's going to only be amping up in the months to come. Yeah, the other thing that makes me laugh that I have a note here on too is like the kind of idea of aliens and ufology. It's like they're so foreign. We can't understand them. We don't know what they're doing, and they could come at any moment. It's so chaotic. And they're making everyone like a sitting duck again, so that these scientist priests can just come in and tell us who they are, what they are, and, redefine the origin story and everything like that. So we're basically just sitting on our hands waiting for the most corrupt people imagined. Like, let's be honest, what's going on in politics in most of the public institutions is such an intense level of corruption and tyranny that it's hard for to even imagine it. It makes your eyes water how corrupt and tyrannical the public institutions have become today. So now we're going to just believe hook, line, and sinker what they tell us about the cosmos and aliens? No, we're not. We're going to push back on those individuals in that institution with everything we possibly have. And maybe through that, we'll get something. But the real movement and how we really develop is through creating a counter movement and speaking the truth. And that forces institutions into your wave. You don't wait for the government, for three-letter agencies, for these people who are clearly corrupt to give you anything. Because they're not going to, because that's not how they operate. You have to create the counter movement, speak the real truth, and give it so much power, have it be such an engine that those corrupt individuals have to collapse into your reality and serve that truth in order to continue on. That's what we do. That's how change is created. You don't sit on your hands and wait for the most corrupt people imaginable to give you some crumbs. And just think positive thoughts because that's what we deserve and that's what we have to do. No. You create a counter movement. You make it very, very big, so big that it overshadows all that crap. And then everything serves that good, higher intention, which is what we deserve and what we need when it comes to understanding the cosmos and the spiritual hierarchies. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to talk about is time and developmental time. I did want to get into RH negative today, but I'm not going to have time to cover that properly. So I'll probably cover RH negative in future video, but don't worry, I have that coming. So the last thing I want to say is that we spent a lot of time in these lectures understanding that the planet and human beings develop in stages, right? In anthroposophy, this is called epochs of development. And there's, you can even divide pretty much everything into periods of 7 and notice distinct changes in consciousness and in the form and things like this. Like the metamorphosis of consciousness and form in planet is law. So this also relates directly to how the spiritual hierarchies and higher beings from there and lower beings from the abyss or the 8th sphere interact with us. So essentially, humanity does not interact with spiritual beings in the same way all the time. Why would we? That doesn't make any sense because humanity is evolving, the planet's evolving. And so we have to understand that we don't, like, for example, with the spiritual hierarchies or the angels, we don't interact with them in the same way throughout our development. All right. So in earlier phases of our development, we're more like a child. See, this is a recapitulation of even the human being's development. In earlier phases, humanity is more like a child, an infant. And the beings within the spiritual hierarchies are like parental figures. So humanity, even before the Lemurian epoch, didn't even have self-awareness. We had more of a consciousness compared to an animal, okay? And we weren't really an animal, but we had the consciousness sort of more of an animal. And so when we had that, we had to have higher beings that would step in and stand behind this developing human form and mesh it and make sure that it was aligning with God. Okay, so in very early stages of development, humanity didn't have an eye. We weren't self-aware. And so a lot of what we were doing was just being actually dominated and guided by these incredible spiritual angelic beings that were guiding our development, like your parents would guide you, right? And then it gets to a kind of midpoint where you're sort of like, becoming more aware, and we can kind of place this in the Lemuria period at the end, going into Atlantis. And now the human form is totally solid and getting more faculties. And now the beings from the hierarchy walk amongst us. We actually understand that beings from the spiritual hierarchy are walking amongst us. We know that they are exalted figures. And this is where we talk about walking amongst the gods and beings from other spheres assisting us, and the Venusians and, Sumat Kumara, and all these ancient legends that we have where we were visited, not in ships. That's a materialist interpretation, but naturally through these planetary spheres, namely Venus, being another version of the Earth and just appearing here. Okay, they just appear. And so then that happens for a period of time. And that's a distinctly different period, by the way, than the earlier period where the human being was just enmeshed by them. So now there's a bit of a separation occurring, and humanity has a little bit more sovereignty, and we are sort of interacting with beings from different spheres. Then humanity is finally prepared, and around that Atlantean epoch, we get our eye. We get our divine spark. We get our self-awareness. Again, not through genetic modification because some alien came and fiddled around with your genetics, but because a very great being sacrificed themselves to create an illumination in the human being. And at that point, the human being becomes sovereign. Now the human being is grown up. Now they're a very early adult. And they contain a faculty that has given them the ability to know God within themselves and to develop completely via their own free will and volition. It never happened before. And because of that, we do not interact with the angelic hierarchies in the same way. The angelic hierarchies backed away. The beings from Venus had a choice. Once the sacrifice was done and humanity received their eye, their divine spark, their manas, once they received that, the Venusian spirits, the angels from Venus, had a choice. They could retreat backwards or upwards into the Venusian sphere, and they could go on a different stream of development. Or, as some Venusian angels did, they could incarnate into the form. But what couldn't happen is you couldn't have beings from the spiritual planes walking amongst humanity like a god, right? Telling them what to do, lording over them. That's an insult to humanity, and it's not appropriate. Humanity has to develop on their own. Now, there still is certain basic protections. There still is a lot of angelic help every day for every human being and for the planet, because a lot goes into the development of a planet and a person. So it's not like we don't have angels or we don't have guides. We have so much help. We have so much assistance, and we're guided so much. But the whole point is that we're not guided in the same way that we were in earlier days. So you don't have like an alien being showing up saying, "Hi, I'm from this planetary sphere. I created you. Hi, I'm from this planet and I'm more advanced than you. Hi, I'm from this star system and I'm going to teach you how to do X, Y, Z and develop this technology." And like, you don't have that. That is no longer relevant. But how demonic entities function is they will simply keep trying to recapitulate the patterns of the past. So they keep trying to pull humanity into the idea that they're not individuals, they don't have sovereignty, and that we still need to be lorded over by aliens. We still need to be created by aliens. Okay? Or not still need to be, that we need to be created by these aliens. We need to have these beings from other spheres be the reason why we exist and why we evolve. And it's completely a backwards inversion. Once humanity develops their individuality, they get the spark of mind, they're in another stage of development, not only in their own essence, not only in their life, but in the cosmos at large, because everything is interconnected. Everything is a microcosm of the macrocosm. So again, not only do we go into a different phase of human development, human beings go into a different phase of development in the cosmos entirely. So we are no longer visited physically. We're no longer visited in the same way that we were when we were like little children. Okay? You don't get that. And any beings that do show up and start telling you these things, telling you the alien god ideology, or people that are possessed by these beings that regurgitate this ideology, these are trying to regress society backwards into a prior state of development where humanity was not sovereign. And the only reason why beings want to take humanity to a point where humanity is not sovereign anymore is because they want to feed on them and control them. I'm sorry, but that is the pattern. Okay? So once we become sovereign, once we become individuals, we are challenged to develop on our own. We have to remember who we are. And on a planetary sense, the eighth sphere forms around the Earth. A membrane actually forms around the Earth once it reaches its peak matter. The human being gets their individuality, their mind, and a membrane forms around the Earth that acts like a mirror. And the only way the human being can make it past the eighth sphere is through, like I said earlier, transformation. So the human and the planet change once we get to a certain point of development in the solar system. There was a time in earlier human development when we didn't have the abyss around the Earth, the eighth sphere, the lower planes, encapsulating the Earth. And beings could come and go very easily. We had a kind of more of a hive mind. And it was just different then. But then, now we're in a different phase. And the only way we move into a higher stage of development is through personal responsibility, through self-development, through understanding the power of Christ in our heart center, because Christ is the transformational force that allows for us to move beyond matter. And of course, the Christ force is existing in the life of Jesus, but has existed before Jesus and will exist after Jesus. And, knowing this is the information of the cosmic Christ and the solar force, which is the expanded esoteric Christian version, which completely acknowledges the initiate that was Jesus, but also expands it into understanding it in the larger sense of the cosmos as well. It only deepens our understanding of Christ. It doesn't take anything away from it. It only allows us to more deeply understand that sacrifice in a planetary sense, in a cosmic sense, and even to see similar times where things like that have happened. Okay, like why Christ was also referred to as the morning star. That's Venus. We just talked about today how the spark of mind was also given by Venus. Okay, this is the morning star. This is Christ. All right, this is the Christ essence. So I'm going to end it here. I hope that makes sense. Do leave your questions for me in the comments below. I do want to take some time and answer those. But seeing if there's anything else. I think that's good. This is a long one today, so thank you if you're still staying with me. I'm going to be continuing talking about all of this stuff in the series. We're going to get into next lecture, probably into the Rh negative thing. I've already addressed the chromosomes in my prior one, and the reality that a lot of what people think are jumps are actually due to the Christ force or the solar force's effect on our body, not genetic modification as much. Doesn't mean we haven't been modified at certain points by, lower beings, right? But We have to understand that the metamorphosis of the human being is always due to the Christ force within, or the solar force which actually catalyzes our genetics. Okay, it actually catalyzes our DNA, catalyzes us into a higher form, which is what we were talking about too, with the sacrifice of these higher beings actually changes us in that way. That's how we evolve. And then I will get into the RH negative conversation and the blood. We're also going to get into a deeper look at the Venusians and this, the teachings on Venus and the teachings on the angels from Venus, just because, no matter where you go in ufology, no matter where you go in the New Age scene, it always comes back to these, basically what people think are like creator beings. And so we're going to really hammer that in, and we're really going to explore that, how that's being told in the Eastern tradition, how it's been told in the Western tradition. We're going to really explore that so we have that information. If you like my material, please keep it going. Please keep it alive by signing up for my premium membership. I do live Q&As there. I go a lot deeper than some of the stuff that you can do on YouTube as well. I have probably hundreds of hours of archived live Q&As where I cover pretty much any topic people ask about for years now. That's all available to you on my website. I also have forums, and there's an amazing community. We do all sorts of fun little games and stuff over there as well. So I'd love to see you there. You can also support my work by making a donation. That just helps keep the lights on over here. I'm completely supported by you. And also don't forget to sign up for my newsletter to know when I'm going to be lecturing and all this kind of stuff, because all y'all know that you don't get the notifications a lot of the time. So do sign up for my newsletter there. And like, subscribe, and comment. And I will see you in the next video. All my love your way.